magazine as well. How you doing, man? How are things?
I'm doing pretty good.
Are you on campus?
Things are going pretty well. It's a busy week because not only you got Big Red Weekend, you got camps and stuff, but things are going well.
Are you? When do you hit campus, or do you follow these guys around? What's your weekend look like? I mean, how do you report on this thing? Do you just call them after the weekend? Are you invited ever to the weekend?
No, I really try and call kids after the weekend, or maybe even try and stay in touch with them, through text messages and stuff. The thing is I don't like to bother guys when they're on campus. I think that's disrespectful to them. I think it's disrespectful to the coaching staff, their ability to do a job. And so I really try and kind of back off. I might send a text to a guy and see when he's going to be leaving campus, but I really don't try and talk to him very much, while they're in town, just because they got other things on their mind.
Josh, the Big Red Weekend is something that's only been around for the last couple years. Can you tell us a little bit about how this got started and why Nebraska decided to have a big banner visit day in the middle of the summer?
Well, it was just a creative idea by, I believe, Ross Ells and Coach Pelini, is to try and attract talent in. We've talked about the recruiting disadvantages before for Nebraska. It's hard to get guys into Lincoln on their own dime before the official visit process. But I think it was an idea that, if we could get 3, 4, maybe 5 guys in, big-time players, invite-only type players, that maybe more guys would be willing to come instead of just a regular junior day earlier in the year where, you could have up to 100 guys and 99% of them aren't going to get an offer. And so they really kind of tailored this to be more of an invite-only, and I think a lot of kids have responded. I think last year's was bigger than they ever expected. When going into the event, Ross Ells and people like that they weren't for sure how many they were going to get. And so I think the event turned out to be bigger last year than expected. I don't think it's going to be quite as big this year. We've had quite a few cancellations over the last 24 to 48 hours, but I still think it's going to be a very good weekend. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's a weekend that you see some news come out of it.
Well, the big news that's already come out is that Mick Stoltenberg has received an offer from Nebraska. How long, in your mind, does he wait to commit to any school?
I don't know, because Mick has somewhat gone quiet, and it's a thing where when I've talked to Mick before, he really wanted to play defense, and it sounds like this offer is for the offensive side of the football. I just briefly talked to him a little bit yesterday, and he had never even really played on the offensive side. He is going to play offensive line this year for Gretna. So I don't know. I don't know how much that factors in. If it's one of those things that he wants to go to Nebraska so bad, he'll do whatever it takes. And so I think until he kind of breaks his silence, it's just going to be a guessing game, and we really don't know when that's going to even happen.
Well, we've heard Steve Warren compare him to, I believe, Kyle Vanden Bosch. That's a pretty good defensive end. Why wouldn't Nebraska want, if he's that good, a Kyle Vanden Bosch type?
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree with Steve on that assessment. And so obviously he's got the credentials to throw that out there. I don't think Nebraska obviously saw it either. Otherwise, this offer, I think, would have been on the defensive side of the football. And who knows, maybe down the road, he agrees to play offense. He tears it up at Gretna this year, and they say, you know what, we do want you for the defensive side of the football. Obviously, things can change. But I think he showed enough yesterday and showed that he's athletic enough that he could really play multiple positions, and that's kind of what they were looking for. And you could really tell that when they were working him out, because they played him, I believe, 5 different spots yesterday, and so they were really trying to find a spot for him.
Josh, are these kids that are in town for Big Red Weekend, are they working out at a camp, or are they just visiting, or what's the structure? How's this set up?
No, they're just visiting. Most of the guys here are offeree guys, and I've always said you don't camp somewhere that you have an offer. It's just silly to me because there's nothing good that can come out of it. The only thing that can come out of a camping with an offer from that school is they see you, they don't like you, they take the offer away. Because it's not like they can give you a better offer or more money scholarship-wise. And so, but no, these guys will actually not be camping. They're just coming in, and it's very similar to a junior day where they're coming in, taking the tours. They're probably having a dinner with their position coach. They're having breakfast with Bo Pelini on Monday morning. They're maybe going and talking to some academic support centers and whatnot. but it's really more of that junior day feel. The only difference is it's later in the year and it's an invite only.
At last count from the stories I read, there are about 15 targets from either this coming class, 2014, or 2015 class coming in. Who were some of the biggest names that Husker fans should keep an eye on, in your opinion, that are here this weekend?
Well, I think there's been a lot of cancellations, but I think one of the biggest is Peyton Newell. He's a defensive tackle out of Kansas, a four-star guy. I think we have him rated around number 18. He has 36 offers, and it's narrowed down to 6. I really like Nebraska's chances here. I think eventually he commits. He's going to make a decision right before the school year. And I was trying to think this morning how many visits he's taken to Nebraska, but this has got to be at least his 5th visit. And so I think that bodes really well. So he's definitely a name to watch. There's a really good quarterback out of Alabama named Matthew Jordan, a guy who it seems like everywhere in the SEC they want him to play wide receiver or safety. There's not many schools that are giving him an opportunity to play quarterback. Boston College is one. Nebraska's one. And so I could see him not necessarily committing this weekend, but him being a guy that you could see commit down the road because he had a good time at Big Red Weekend and because they're willing to let him play the position that he wants. DJ Foster's coming in, obviously a local kid. He's got some impressive offers. T.V. Williams was actually here yesterday. He's a wide receiver out of McKinney. A lot of schools are chasing after him. And then there's a couple 2015 prospects as well. So it's definitely shaping up to be a good weekend. I don't think any of the big names are going to commit this weekend, but I'm expecting 2 commitments out of the weekend.
We had heard that maybe Freedom Akin, help me with the last name.
Yeah, good luck. I call him Freedom A.
Yeah,
that's how
Akin Moladun is what I'm going with.
Is he in town this weekend?
Yeah, as last I know, we confirmed, I believe, with him yesterday morning that he was coming into town. He's one guy that I actually could see pulling the trigger. He's got family ties here. I think this is a guy that in Nebraska, that offer looks really impressive to him. The other guy that I would maybe go out on a limb and say I think he commits this weekend is DeMore May Pearson-L out of West Potomac, Virginia, a wide receiver. I think he's another guy that could be very close. We have him as a 3-star wide receiver. His position ranking is actually around the 140s for wide receivers, but he's got a North Carolina offer. He's got a Boston College offer, a Marshall offer. There's been quite a few schools that are very interested. He's gotten a lot of looks this spring, and he's a guy that's always talked well about Nebraska when he talks about him, and so he's another guy that I could see pulling the trigger this weekend.
Josh Harvey, Big Red Report and BigRedReport.com. We know that Harrison Phillips had a pretty good camp, and Nebraska said, well, we'll let you know. Do you think that he ultimately gets an offer, or is he kind of too much of a tweener?
I don't know. I don't think at this point there's going to be an offer, but down the road, maybe it's open for discussion again. I think Stoltenberg, it almost felt like even though they were in different camps that they were competing for that one offer. And I think fans will be like, well, why is there only one in-state offer? I don't think it was that. I think it was more of a need. And when you looked at Stoltenberg, I thought, to be completely honest, he did all those things. Every position, I thought he was just a little bit better than Phillips. And so, and he's bigger. And so I really don't know if that offer comes down the road. I think it probably depends on some other guys and where they fall, maybe including Stoltenberg. I think it just completely remains to be seen.
Josh, you had mentioned that you think Nebraska gets maybe 2 commits out of this weekend. Last year, they got 2 commits out of Big Red Weekend. What does a successful weekend look like? Do they have to get 2 to get this to be a success, or does it, if they just get the one guy, if it's a big name, then it's a success?
I don't even think if they necessarily get one guy, it's a success. I don't think you can judge this weekend like next week. I mean, if you go back to last year, they got 2 coming out of the weekend, but then they got other guys down the road. They got a Zach Hannon down the road. There was at least one more that was there last year that ended up committing down the road. And so I think it's one of those things that you really can't judge this weekend for maybe 3 or 4 months, because it might be a situation where a guy comes in and visits and Nebraska kind of sets the bar. He goes and takes 3 or 4 more visits and then realizes there's not a better situation for me than Nebraska. And so, we'll have to judge this in October or November and really see how many commitments they got out of it and see how much this weekend really drummed up interest for some of these guys.
Assuming that Harrison Phillips does not get an offer at defensive end or D tackle or wherever they might want to put him, is the last guy on Nebraska's board from the state DJ Foster? Is that the last guy?
Well, they have Gifford, they have Foster. I don't think Kenzo Cotton's gonna get an offer. Easton Stick had an interesting tweet today. He's a quarterback out of Creighton Prep, and I was actually going to call him right after I got off the phone with you guys. He camped earlier in the week at Nebraska's quarterback academy. He came back to Nebraska today and threw again and said he had a meeting on Twitter with Coach Pelini. And so if they were asking him back, that seemed very interesting to me. And as far as I know, Nebraska is only planning on taking one quarterback in this class. So maybe it was a situation where, they tell the guy, hey, we really want you as a preferred walk-on. But the thing is he's got an offer from Akron. I think he's going to get more D1 offers down the road. And so it would be weird for that to happen. And so he's a guy that, I could say, well, maybe potentially something's happening there. I want to call him and find out. But otherwise, I think really that's kind of the list.
And another quarterback, Josh, that at least is listed as being a visitor for Big Red Weekend is a guy that, according to a World Herald story today, is making quite an effort to get there, and that's Matthew Jordan out of Alabama. Never been on an airplane before, but is getting on an airplane in Mississippi and doing a couple of different travel stops to get to Nebraska. Doesn't have a lot of big offers yet, but is he a guy that could earn an offer? Have they offered him yet, or is that something they're looking?
Yeah, they have offered Matthew. He's the guy that I mentioned earlier that kind of in the SEC everybody wants him as an athlete. He was really hoping for an Auburn offer last week. He camped with them as a wide receiver. I don't think that offer ever came. And as far as I know, he's a guy that wants to make a decision before the school year. But it sounds like a situation where he's almost trying to find a school closer to home. And so I'll be very intrigued to see what he says about Nebraska coming out of the weekend, because I think right now the Huskers are in pretty good shape, but I'd like to see them be in better shape and not maybe necessarily a secondary option for him, because that's almost the impression I get, and I think that's the impression some of our analysts get down in the South, that Nebraska is kind of a school right now that it's almost by default, and if you're a Husker fan, you don't want to hear that because you don't want to worry about him and down the road in October or November being a guy that, could switch a commitment if somebody came to the table and offered him as a quarterback. The thing we got to remember, too, is Zach Darlington's still sitting out there, the Florida quarterback who won a state championship last year. He had a great visit to Nebraska last week, supposedly, then went on a mission, and we're still waiting to kind of hear, what might happen there. And so it could be a race for some of these guys to get their name in because, if a Darlington was to commit, then maybe Jordan's offer's off the table or vice versa.
Right.
And that's why I want to talk to Easton Stick because I want to find out, what that situation looks like. And so it could be an interesting couple days, maybe a week at the quarterback position for Nebraska.
I know some Husker fans get upset when they see that Kentucky has 16 commits, top 5 class, depending on what recruiting service you go by, and 7 Ohio guys, and yet, of course, Vince Morrow never got an offer to be an assistant on the staff. Is there any legitimacy there in the anger or angst from some Husker fans?
No, I don't think so at all, because first off, Bo would have had to fire somebody on his staff to, keep Vince Morrow around, and I don't know who you would have done to do that. I also look at their recruiting class, and they have a lot of commitments right now, and so they're pretty high in the rankings. And they pulled a few really good names, but the majority of their list is a lot of 3-star guys, a lot of guys from Ohio, which obviously Kentucky's closer to Ohio, which is a hotbed for talent, and because Stoops and Morrow have connections there, I don't think this recruiting class is necessarily going to be as impressive when we get to October, November, December, and when a lot of other schools have the same amount of commitments as them, because from the looks of it, it seems like there's a lot of 3-star guys that I think Nebraska is a little more selective, is what I'm trying to say at this point, and then just taking anybody. And I don't want to say Kentucky's just taking anybody, but I don't think they're quite being as selective as a school like Nebraska.
Josh, appreciate your time. Enjoy Big Red Weekend.
Hey, no problem, guys. I will definitely talk to you later.